Welcome to Ownership Requires Leadership, the podcast for dentists who refuse to settle. I'm your host, Mike Baird. Dentist-owned, dentist-led practices are best for doctors, their teams, patients, and communities. The dental industry is changing, but you don't have to sell out to corporate dentistry to succeed. With the right team, you can stay on as an owner, maximize your outcomes, and achieve your goals. Accelerate Dental helps doctors retain control while gaining strategic partners and elite back office support. Ownership requires leadership. Let's dive in. All right, welcome to the Accelerate Dental podcast. One of the things that we've been trying to do as we share knowledge about what we're doing out there is to share insights into what it looks like to be part of our group. One of the things that distinguishes being an Accelerate is we're real big believers in always being curious and always learning. And so one of the things that we do is we have a leadership training academy where on a monthly basis, typically we're doing leadership training sessions. And we thought it would be fun to start to share snippets of those training sessions with people on our podcast as a way just to learn a little bit more what it means to be part of Accelerate, but also to share some great knowledge on topics that can be very helpful for dentists. So today I'm meeting with Dallen Miner. Dallen's a good friend of mine. We've worked together for many, many years. He's the owner and CEO of Capability Consulting. It's a firm that's dedicated to creating productive and positive office and work cultures. Dallen brings a wealth of knowledge from consulting with startups all the way to Fortune 500 companies, and he's been a long-term partner of Accelerate Dental in helping us develop and scale our leadership training. Today, we wanted to talk about giving feedback, and specifically giving feedback without triggering fight or flight reactions and ways to help our practices. And we see this as being a really big need in offices because you've got a lot of employees that can benefit from that feedback, and dentists often struggle to give feedback. So I think we wanted to dive into this today. Dallen, why is it that feedback feels so unnatural for dentists and practice owners?
Even outside of the dental practice, adults struggle to give good communication. It's odd. With all the functional things that happen, it's still a challenge. And to illustrate that, if someone says, I have some feedback for you, it immediately goes to a negative space. It's very interesting. Added to that, we have additional information like the DISC personality profile, and different profiles communicate and receive and give feedback in different ways. And 80% plus of dentists usually are what's called the perfectionist profile, which is very task oriented, very factually oriented. And in that scenario, they tend to hold back, proceed with the concept of no news is good news, and keep things to themselves. The staff, on the other hand, gets used to this style of either receiving very little feedback or this fight or flight that kicks in regards to, as you just mentioned, this zero feedback to I'm going to get fired because I'm getting negative feedback.
Yeah, I think it becomes a little unnatural because they don't hear it regularly, that it feels like, okay, if I'm hearing something, this is a unique event. So I think that helps lead into how we can prepare our staff and our teams to receive that feedback in a better way. So, as a doctor, how would I think about lowering those defenses so that feedback is actually heard and received well by my teams?
Yeah, that's correct, Mike. Let's use the concept made popular by Stephen Covey in his book Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about an emotional bank account being just like a regular bank account, that if you're constantly making withdrawals, you don't have any money in your account. To apply that in an office situation, it's a program or a framework where if a dentist thinks I'm making deposits, I'm asking about how they're doing and sincerely meaning it, I'm giving them specific praise, which are of course deposits. If I then need to do a withdrawal, then there's this aspect of I've got enough in the bank account. So that concept of deposits, withdrawals is a way to think about relationships. Applying it to feedback, it's this aspect of I want to normalize feedback. I want to make it a part of our culture. It's something that we do frequently and often.
I like that. I think it's interesting. You bring up a great point in that we tend to think of feedback. I think if someone says, I'm going to give you feedback, we instantly go to negative, right? This is going to be something I'm doing wrong. And I like your point that it can both be positive and developmental, but by having that more often, it also makes it less fearful. One thing that I've heard is that if you are asking for feedback on a regular basis as a manager, that also helps normalize it as well. Like I need feedback too. You need feedback. I need feedback. Have you seen that as well in your consulting?
Absolutely. Whether it's a personality component or how things were in school, the expectations, I'm never going to have time to or ask the dentist how he or she is doing. Uh, and Likewise, if you're giving feedback and asking for feedback in return, it changes the culture, it changes the aspect of that we have a feedback rich, informed culture. And I'm comfortable talking about what's positive or how we could tweak something, or on the flip side, having a difficult conversation and still maintaining the relationship.
Yeah, it seems like one of the great forums for this is in the daily huddle. I think it's meant to be obviously an organizational step to align the practice, but most dentists will do this in a past, present, future. So what did yesterday look like? What does today look like? What does tomorrow look like? And I think when a dentist takes that moment to say, hey, any feedback for me as the clinician in the practice, it also then makes it really easy to turn around and say, here's a couple things that I noticed. And so I think that normalization really helps. So kind of moving along, as if we want to have feedback given, there needs to be a standard of performance that you're being measured against. So how do you think about dentists and others setting the stage for accountability and helping employees understand what's expected of them?
Excellent point. Let's break this down into two parts. The first is that you've got to set clear expectations. That there's this feeling sometimes in a dental office, well, you're the hygienist. Well, you work the front desk, or you're an assistant. You should know what to do. Or here's an ADA job description, do this. Instead, a productive practice that is in feedback rich is giving feedback in regards to specifics on what you do. So, yes, the job description's helpful, but I like to think about it like a bullseye, where the very center is the core that you do, and you're the only one that does that in the office. Outside of that, what are you involved in? Every single component, every job within a practice has a handoff and is dependent on the other people in the office. So, given that, there are things that you're involved with. And then finally, things that you're aware of. Oftentimes, we don't communicate that there has been a change or a format that is slightly different or needs to be emphasized. And then, let's say a hygienist bumps up against that. So, here's one more example. If you're The front desk clearly is welcoming in new patients and answering the phone. But if the phone rings twice and someone stepped away from the front desk, then whose job is it? And it's never the doctor's responsibility. It depends on the layout, it depends on the conversation. If you have the discussion, well, if it rings twice or someone's not at the front desk, then it ought to be, and then create those specifics in regards to expectations. This also goes back to giving and receiving good feedback. Be clear. It's not you clean up. It's your job is to sterilize the tools and put them away or reseal them and have them here in this drawer. Those kind of specifics people appreciate.
So I want to touch back on what you said. You talked about the ADA job description, and I think you mean the American with Disabilities Act. So let's help delineate, what the difference between an ADA job description is and what an effective either job description or explanation and how you get someone to that point.
Being in dental practices, I'll see binders typically in the corner or filed underneath the front desk. They're this thick and has every single procedure. It's not an aspect of trying to map out all of that and make it bureaucratic. The idea is that you're making it living. So I always am fascinated by these 15-page job descriptions, and it usually ends in a funny statement like must be able to like lift 50 pounds. Well, yeah, yes, that is helpful in a part of the job, but bringing it to life, making it real, having that ebb and flow clearly communicated, that's the component of making it real and making it applicable in the office. And that aspect of these are core duties that only I do. These are duties that I'm constantly involved in. These are things I ought to be aware of, I think is a better format.
Well, I like that because it as you laid out kind of that tiering, it's almost like a prime and a secondary. Like, hey, you're on the front desk. It's clearly your job to be answering the phone. But if I'm explaining to an assistant in the practice or the office manager, or whoever it is, that yes, it is the primary responsible of the front desk to answer the phone. But if they're busy or they're out to lunch, anyone in the office, it could be a hygienist or something. If the phone's ringing and you happen to be walking by and you're free, we're all here to help out. And so that to me is where you start to blend primary, secondary responsibilities, but also you're teeing up kind of the culture of expectations more broadly, as opposed to must be able to talk professionally on a phone, must be able to lift 50 pounds, must be able to, whatever the ADA job description that you gave an example of. It's interesting, even with all that, when we get to the point where we have to give feedback, we've all experienced this. Someone pulls you aside and says, I want to give you feedback, and instantly you feel your blood pressure go up a little bit, your heart might start to beat a little bit, you're feeling like, oh no, I've done something wrong. And I feel like we start to react in a very negative way before anything's even said. Like, it could be a positive thing that's coming, and I would still feel this way, and I wouldn't realize this. So, how do you help? What are the tips to help deliver those messages without kind of triggering this fight or flight response that people naturally have?
Yeah, and this is the second part of what we just referred to, and that is practicing giving and receiving good feedback. And what you're just talking about is we know more and more about the brain, the amygdala. And the amygdala, when it ignites, that fight, flight, or freeze does kick in. And we've learned that blood actually drains from your brain, and a person's ability to communicate or remember is diminished. So we're wanting to try to relieve all of that and to minimize that. So there's a TED talk that I heard that I really like. It is from psychologist Leanne Reniger, and she maps out 4 simple steps. Let's talk about those. The first is getting to a micro yes. And it also might sound a little bit like just being polite because you're going to get a micro yes. That first yes is now a good time for feedback. Or could we talk about this later this afternoon? Or I've got something I'd like to share. Is now a good time to talk about X? That micro yes helps signal to the brain that feedback is coming and that we talked about it's useful. The second point is about going to data, using data. And what we often do is we toss out blur words. Blur words are, I've got a clear meaning on it, but other people might not. So this aspect of, I've got to give you some feedback is big general. Or we need to talk about your performance. That's that fight, flight, or freeze, and 0 to be inspired on a scale that I've heard you use that I like. So name specifically what you're going to talk about. We need to talk. I would like to talk about cleaning this, sterilizing the tools. I would like to talk about an advanced technique for how we could improve the handoff between hygienist and the dentist, or even between the assistant and the dentist. And so those details create clarity and ease the amygdala so that I can engage and remember. The next is making an impact statement. This aspect of I want to talk with you about how you pass me tools, something as simple as that, can help me be more efficient and it makes me feel more confident. Those impact statements is a way to understand why we're having the conversation and engage. Finally, the fourth component is to wrap it up in a question. We've already talked about asking for feedback, but I love the simple statement of, how do you see it? Or do you have some additional insight? That is creating and reinforcing really good feedback. And on the the larger level, an aspect of creating that culture that the dentist and all the employees want.
That's fantastic. I really like that. It's so frustrating that, in the moment when we most need to hear the feedback, we're least prepared to receive it, right? And everything shuts
And
down.
remember and engage
Uh,
about it. Yes.
yeah. So the micro yes is really interesting. The data point one is another really interesting one because I feel like it's really easy to say things. I need you to work harder. I need you to be more diligent. Could you be more friendly with our patients? And that's very different than, hey, I've noticed that when we all leave, no one's taking out the trash. Like, can you be the one that is in charge of doing this? That's much more specific. I've given a data point, and yet, wrapping it all together with the, how it impacts the team, or giving them a chance to join in on how do you see it. Those are
Yes.
great insights.
And great examples, all of those. Everything from how you treat the patient to efficiency in the office.
So mostly what we've talked about thus far are the regular, repeated, hopefully kind of everyday types of feedback. How does this then translate to, annual performance reviews and more formalized feedback? I think for a while it's kind of been in vogue almost for, maybe it's a Gen Z thing that we shouldn't have annual performance reviews. We don't need that anymore. We're all great. And yet I think in a dental practice, if you don't have clear expectations and regular check-ins and ways to help people understand why they're getting promoted or not promoted, et cetera, I feel like the annual performance review is important. So how do you think about annual performance reviews, and how would you advise folks to do that in a dental practice?
It should be a safe, frequent, and collaborative way to discuss specific feedback and more strategic feedback than the day to day. It is interesting because most people dread performance feedbacks, performance reviews. Both the manager, the office manager, or the dentist, as well as the employee, there's this feeling of angst and there's a lot of mistakes that's made, usually because it's immediately tied to how I'm going to be ranked or paid. So, first of all, detach it from that. Then, second of all, I really like some of the work that Patty McCord did. She was the chief culture officer at Netflix when she talked about we do something once a year, only once a year, we're terrible at it. So once a year, we're all bad at this performance appraisal, and so change that. And this is her exact quote, which I really liked. If you want a culture of candor and accountability, you may want to consider simple, frequent, and more direct feedback. And so, in that spirit, I'm a big fan of having the performance appraisal be at least 3 or 4 times a year. That's once every 4 months. That's quarterly, once every 3 months. And then put that responsibility in the hands of the employee. Have the employee start out with his or her goals. Have the employee fill out a short form. Here are some things that I'm doing well, or here's the results of the goals that we set 4 months ago together. And I'm also a fan of trying to make it less scientific. Um, this desire to try to quantify human behavior is challenging. And I've seen so many reviews where it becomes a scale of 1 to 10 or letter grades. I'm getting an A, I'm getting an A plus. And you spend time squabbling about whether it's an A or an A minus, or whether it's a B plus or a C plus. Instead, I'm a big fan of you're on target. You're as expected. Thank you. We have high standards, but you're on target. You're exceeding my expectations, or it's below target. So just simple three: on target, above target, below target. And that helps neutralize part of this anxiousness around, I've got to get just a little bit higher score. And then you're having a really good dialogue. Uh, Rounding out on this, I have managers or the doctors that say, I know, but what if they score themselves really high? Well, have the dialogue, have the discussion. And in my opinion, the employee fills out something short, something easy, and then gives it to their manager or to the doctor. The doctor reviews it and then gives their feedback. So the manager still has the final word and can say, hey, you ranked yourself above target on this. And some of your points I agree with. Here are a couple of other elements that I'd like to talk about. So you have the dialogue, and because it's not a formula that goes immediately into how they're paid, you're having honest and good ongoing dialogue.
I really like that. There's a couple things that stand out to me about this one. We talked about the typical dentist personality, and obviously there's a whole range of different types of people that become dentists. But we found that in our research that you and I have done on dentists in our group, that 80% of them tend to have a very similar profile, and they're even more afraid of this than the employees are. They really don't like this feedback. And so what's interesting is if this becomes normalized, it almost it's a self-reinforcing mechanism. So if I just know that once a quarter, I'm going to invite every single person in the office to just a quick sit down. Hey, let's check in. How are we doing? It helps. Number one, it normalizes it for the office, but number two, it actually helps the doctor do what they don't want to do and makes them do it. The other thing I love about your above target, below target, it's pretty simple in an office to put together a one pager that says, we'll use the front desk as an example. Like, here are the core duties, back to our job descriptions. How do you think you're doing at answering the phone? How do you think you're doing at collections? How do you think you're doing at, rescheduling patients, et cetera, et cetera? And just put, five of those down on a piece of paper and let them say, above, below. And even if they're off, it's created an opportunity to have the dialogue. It's interesting. I find that probably 70% of people are right in the right range. They're actually relatively self-aware. They know, I'm pretty good at answering the phones, but man, I struggle with collections. Every once in a while, you're going to get someone that is a little delusional. I'm the best ever, right? And this is a good opportunity to help wind them back. But interestingly, I also find that you get people that are overly harsh on themselves and will do the same thing. Oh, I'm just terrible at that. And this ends up being a very positive way to reinforce the good things that employee is doing and ultimately make them feel better about themselves. They tend to perform even better in the office because they know, well, I'm actually better at this than I thought that I was. And that tends to lead to overall happiness and retention. So I think there's a lot of upsides from dentists taking the time in doing this.
Yes, I agree.
We've covered a lot of great things. We're trying to keep these bite-sized, and so I'll do an overview of some of the points here at the end. But I think as you think about some of the key things that you would want to summarize with, what would you hit on?
I would hit on just a couple of quick points. The first is that as adults, we want to be learning and growing. So if you change the framework from feedback is going to make them sad, you're actually investing in their development, and growth is positive, hopeful, and helps people succeed. I love the book Atomic Habits, where 1% better is actually more engaging than this feeling of we have an average office and we've plateaued. So this aspect of you want them to be successful, so invest in their long-term success. Listen to their goals. Encourage them to be setting goals. You should be reviewing every day in the morning huddle, big fan of talking about how you're on track for accomplishing goals. People want to be a part of a winning team. They want to be a part of a professional practice that is growing and developing. That includes them. I also, on a second note, want to talk about a quote that I heard from Maya Angelou, which I really has stuck with me. It goes, people will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Having your staff feel like you care about them sincerely and that you're interested in helping them succeed, so positive. So this aspect of empowering them, creating collaborative, hopeful, growing relationships, that has an effect. So your office culture becomes positive, productive, and this aspect of being more efficient and more effective.
Love it. So I'm going to do my quick wrap up. If I were to go back over the things we talked about, number one is to ditch the no news is good news mindset. That's obviously easy. I don't have to talk about it. Just assume I love you until you hear otherwise. That instead, that actually creates a lot of panic for our employees. So the first thing is, how do we normalize feedback as a regular ongoing conversation so it's a tool for a growth and not a threat to their job? And obviously the daily huddle is a great format for that. I always call it the drive-by feedback. Hey, I just I run you into the the break room. Hey, I just noticed this today. Have you ever thought about X, Y, or Z, right? Just a really quick snippet that's not threatening and really easy. Number two, you talked about the emotional bank account, that if we want to have an environment where we give constructive feedback, which is a withdrawal, it's really hard to do it if you haven't built trust and connection, which are deposits. So that, we need to be constantly having both positive and developmental discussions with our employees, but that helps build that emotional bank account so they're more prepared for it and they feel that it comes from a place of caring about them and their performance and making them better. Number three, we talked about really defining tasks and responsibilities, and this notion of what are the core responsibilities, primary responsibilities of every single position. What are the shared tasks and responsibility, which is also just our cultural expectations in our office. So whether that's, we need to all, while it might be the front desk job to answer the phone, we all want the phone answered within 2 or 3 rings, right? And so figuring out what that shared awareness is across the group, and the more crystal clear we are about that, the easier it is to make it happen. And again, I'd reinforce daily huddle is a great way to re-cement that over and over every single day. Like, hey, remember we talked about in our office is the standard. I noticed yesterday this. How can we help with that? Number four, I loved your example on the brain-friendly formula to actually get out of triggering the fight or flight. So there were 4 key things to that. Number one was the micro yes. Do you have a second for some feedback? Or do you have a moment where I can share something? Or can I grab you later on to share a couple things I noticed? We've gotten past that initial fight or flight, high blood pressure. Number two, an actual data point and being away from the subjective blur words. So, hey, I really want to talk about your attitude. Instead, it is, hey, I noticed an event today where you had a specific conflict with a patient, and got a little bit heated. Let's be really specific about what happened, right? So the data point is number two. Number three is the impact statement, why this matters. And I think that's where we say, oh, I noticed that the phone wasn't answered in 2 rings. What happens is when we do that, we miss about 20% of the phone calls in our office. Most of those are people that could be new patients that we're missing out on, and they're going to go to our competitors, and that means we're not going to be able to grow. And if we can't grow, then we don't have the resources to promote and develop our employees, and so on and so forth, making it really resonate to what the actual impact is on the office. And then finally wrapping it up with the question. So how does that resonate to you? How do you see it? Or, giving them some way to comment back and really process that feedback better to see how it syncs with them, and hopefully they'll see that lock in a lot more is real feedback. So that was the 4th one. The 5th one was this idea of putting the review in the employee's hands, and I love that. So let's get away from annual performance reviews, but normalize them. That hopefully 3 or 4 times a year we're doing a quick check-in with our employees. It could be as simple as a 1-pager with 4 to 6 or 10 different duties that employee needs to do, and letting them rate themselves. Am I below target, on target, above target? And especially if then they're setting those goals, what should we think the goal should be this year? It really takes away this idea of am I 99% or 53%, and much more of a low stress dialogue about, am I doing the things that are expected of me or not, which also helps, again, reinforce that feedback is normal and natural and something we do in the practice. Awesome. Those are great points, Dallen. Really appreciate your time today. I think I would just reiterate for our dentists, if you want to be the CEO of your practice, giving feedback is absolutely critical. And in fact, in many ways, it's the ultimate sign of respect. This shows your team you're invested in their long-term success, that you want them to be on your team for the long term. You've given them clarity on how they advance or improve. And really, I loved tying back into that Maya Angelou quote that they might forget what you said, but they won't forget how you made them feel, and that you were really dedicated to helping them grow. So great dialogue, Dallen. Appreciate this discussion on feedback. For folks that are looking for more insight on topics like this, how would they find you?
Couple of A couple of ways. First of all would be to go to the website capabilityconsulting.com, all one word. You could also reach out to me on my phone anytime, 801-822-4000.
Awesome. Well, Dallen, really appreciate you being with us today. Always welcome the feedback from folks as we try to do snippets of our leadership training courses, but I thought this was a really great discussion, and I hope it's very impactful for our dentists. Thanks for listening in today. Thanks for listening to Ownership Requires Leadership. To find more tools to help you transition from clinician to CEO, or to learn about our unique partnership model, visit us at acceleratedental.com. Accelerate Dental. The future is doctor-owned. We'll see you next time.